Welcome into the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. I am Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News, joined as always by Travis Reier, the longtime senior analyst at BamaOnline.com. You can get the Talkin Tide podcast wherever you prefer to get them, Apple Podcasts and everywhere else, also on Facebook and YouTube, live and playback for both of those. The Belly Up Podcast Network now hosting us, Travis. The previous network has gone kaput, and the slogan, Travis, for Belly
as
Up,
they are wont to do.
It's been known to happen, but that Belly Up slogan is kind of middle fingers to haters. You know, it says they told us we'd go belly up, and we're still here. That's right there on the website. So,
sounds like a name we could have come up with for maybe a different reason. You know, belly up to the bar, to the bar.
No question. Exactly. Yeah, dual meaning there for sure. Talkin Tide podcast, of course, brought to you by Peterbrook Chocolatier of Tuscaloosa. More on them just a little bit later in the program. We'll probably have a short one for you here for this particular Sunday nighter. Happy Easter, of course, to all of our listeners and viewers out there as well. And, of course, you can get the Talkin Tide podcast via Twitter as well. Follow us on Twitter. You can get links to the podcast there. So with that, Travis, we'll dive right in. We got a little bit of catching up to do. I think it's been probably a solid 2 weeks since we last cast a pod. Little bit of a transition, getting to a new network that had something to do with that, certainly, and a little more transition still to come. But for now, here we are, mid-spring practice, Travis, the first scrimmage of the spring in the books for Alabama, coming on Friday, the second one upcoming this Saturday. And, Nick Saban with a few interesting things to say following that first scrimmage, which, of course, was closed to the public. Probably going to be a few more eyes on that second scrimmage. I imagine some booster eyes, Travis. But the quarterback question he kind of preempted. They both played well, right? Hands up, Travis. Didn't care to take any more questions about that, I'm sure. But Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson, that battle right there, that's what all eyes are on. That's certainly what all eyes are going to be on come A-Day on April 22nd as well.
Yeah, and I guess you expected him to keep it to those two guys. I mean, obviously you had the two early enrollees in that mix, but as expected, it centered totally on Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson in terms of Nick Saban's post-scrimmage comments. And it sounded like a good day for the offense, which when you think about it from the defensive side of things, because I know as a fan, you hear that and you go, oh, my God, the defense has to replace all these guys, and it's already going to be problematic. Got a couple of new defensive coaches. But it wasn't just the guys that you have to replace. There were guys that were missing in action, right, on the defensive side of the ball. And Kool-Aid McKinstry, that's a pretty big one over there. Chris Braswell, that's another pretty big one to go along with Dallas Turner already being out. Deontay Lawson, as we know, is out at the inside linebacker position. So if there is a spring in which the offense might be ahead of of a defense for a change, this might be it, even with the situation at quarterback that you're transitioning with right now.
Yeah, a lot of turnover coming on defense, Travis, no doubt about it, especially the safety position. That was the question I asked Nick Saban right out of the gate. How did Alabama look at that position? He said Malachi Moore played there, and they ended up going with somebody else at the star spot for this particular scrimmage, I guess, with the ones at any rate. But yeah, the inside linebacker spot, both of those inside linebacker spots in flux. Deontay Lawson, as you noted, not participating in spring. When fall camp rolls around and he gets back, that'll solidify things there a little bit. But obviously at ILB, they're looking at some youngsters at this point in spring practice. And I guess a couple guys who aren't quite as young, and Tresman Marshall, the transfer from Georgia, and Justin Jefferson, the junior college transfer. Both of those guys, you would think, at least one, if not both, you would think are going to be in the mix this fall in some capacity. That's why you bring two-year guys in or transfers in from the portal. With Helms and Jordan Battle moving on, it's a total shakeup at the safety spot as well.
Yeah, as you said, right up the middle of that defense, it's nice to know that you're going to have a big like Jaheim Otis in the middle of that defensive line. But certainly inside linebacker, and with Lawson out this spring, even though you have, as you said, gotten some older guys from the junior college ranks and the transfer portal, Marshall, you would think a pretty easy transition going from Georgia's system to Alabama's system, similar to what Henry To'oTo'o did a couple of years going from Tennessee to Alabama. But safety, no doubt, man. I mean, Jordan Battle, DeMarco Helms played a hell of a lot of football the last few years for Alabama. And not just those guys, but Brian Branch at the sub DB position. So, when you think about no McKinstry on Saturday, Terrion Arnold at corner, but then you're juggling some guys at that spot. That's a lot of DBs that you have to play in those nickel and dime packages, right? I mean, you need to have 6 game-ready defensive backs on a weekly basis. However that breaks down, whether it's 3 safeties and 3 corners. The last couple of years, it's been 4 safeties, 4 safety types and 2 corners. We've both seen them go back and forth with that year to year, it seems like. So, boy, there's a lot of opportunities right now. And, you heard Caleb Downs, the early enrollee, mentioned by Nick Saban. You heard Earl Little at the star position. It's tough, though, because you need a dependable voice on the back end of that defense. So while it's simple to say, well, just play Malachi Moore at the star and play Malachi Moore maybe even at the money and the dime, somebody has to be calling the shots on the back end of the defense. And when you think about it right now, there's not a lot of football played by some of those other candidates.
No, and it's got to be a safety, because it needs to be somebody in the middle of the field who's within earshot of both corners, and of course the middle linebacker is dealing with calls for the front. So yeah, that's something that's got to get nailed down. A-Day is going to be fun, because you mentioned all the DBs needed for those specialty packages, Travis. How about on A-Day when you got 2 secondaries? You need 12. You need to find 12 DBs to work those dime spots. Whichever team ends up being the ones on offense and the 2s on defense, there's going to be some nickels and dimes on that squad too. So
yeah, and for a guy like Christian Story, some of these guys that have been around, Jacquez Robinson's been around for a while now. Whether you're talking about safety, whether you're talking about sub roles, the opportunity isn't going to get better than it is right now for a lot of these guys. So to say it's sort of a fork in the road type of stretch for some of these guys, no doubt about it. Now, you got plenty of first and second year guys that are still learning, right? So if it doesn't happen even in this window, there's another window maybe in a year or two that you could see opening up for some of those guys. But yeah, there's some veteran types that need to really take care of business right now.
I sharpened my pencil for a little math last week, Travis, for a column I wrote on just how young this Alabama team is. And those remedial math skills, as they are, turned up 179 career starts on the spring roster right now. Last year, they had 280. Yeah. It's like, that's a lot more. So this is, and I went back and looked at the spring roster from 2008, because obviously there was a lot of turnover after Nick Saban's first season at Alabama. That squad had like 220 career starts going into spring of 2008. I went back and looked at the 2018 spring roster, because in 2017 they lost that record 12 draft picks. So a lot of high turnover off of that 2017 squad. That squad, I think, had 270, 275 career starts. I venture as strong a guess as one could venture that this is the youngest spring roster Nick Saban's ever had. And you throw in the fact, and Saban mentioned this himself at the beginning of the spring, they got 26 mid-year guys. 22 of whom are true freshmen. So, not only they got a lot, and that's good for them, right? You want as many guys coming in as freshmen in the spring as you can, but there's not a ton of veterans that have played a ton of football all over the place at all.
No, you like having those early enrollees, but it's gone from liking it to needing it.
Yeah.
And that's what they need this spring to really fortify even their two deep in a lot of areas of this football team. So, you know who doesn't really like too many of these early enrollees? Football coaches and tuxedo rental companies, because a lot of these guys are missing prom, or maybe I would think this spring.
Yeah.
I guess they could get back in May and catch that if it's that late. But no, it just speaks to the, as you said, as you outlined, the youth of this football team. I don't recall Alabama having this many early enrollees, and we're not just talking about transfers or junior college guys. There's a couple dozen high school guys already out there with Alabama.
The most career starts anywhere on Alabama's spring roster right now belong to Kool-Aid McKinstry and Malachi Moore.
Yeah.
So Malachi Moore has started more football than I realized when I went back and looked at it.
His
Obviously,
freshman year and even into his sophomore year. Yeah.
So
he played a lot.
Those two guys kind of anchor things experience-wise. On the other side of the ball, Travis, quickly just hustling back over to the offensive side. The offensive line, definitely a big key for this team. You hear Darian Dalcourt and some of these offensive linemen. You kind of hear it in what Saban says, too, that they're looking to get back to a level of toughness that they feel like was missing last year. That's a relatively experienced group when you look at it. I mean, I'm not talking about fourth-year starters coming back. They lost Cohen, they lost Steen, but look, you've got a returning starter certainly in J.C. Latham. I guess it remains to be seen if he'll be playing right tackle or left. My best guess would be left, assuming he develops the way the coaching staff and Eric Walford would like. But then on the interior, you got Tyler Booker, who I know the staff is excited about, played a lot of football at one guard spot. Seth McLaughlin and Darian Dalcourt's getting a look at guard too. So across the three in the interior, if you count Dalcourt as a guard, you got some experience there. But they are wide open for one tackle spot, Travis. I guess Elijah Pritchett may be the front runner there, but that'll be something to watch on 8A too.
Yeah, I think if the one tackle spot takes care of itself, they're going to be fine inside. Seth McLaughlin looking like maybe he's really settling in as the standalone choice, but it's certainly a luxury to have a guy in Darian Dalcourt who has played as much at the center position as he has the last couple of years. Big thing for Dalcourt is guy hasn't been able to stay healthy. I mean, by the end of the 2021 season, he was playing on 2 sprained ankles. And then last year he had another injury issue. So you hope for him in his 5th year, he's able to stay on the field. If he can, then perhaps you do partner him with McLaughlin there as a guard center combo to go along with perhaps Booker at the other guard spot. If Pritchett is good enough to nail down the left tackle spot, then you're in a great spot, because we know what J.C. Latham can give you at right tackle. Right. J.C. Latham's struggles last year weren't so much physically related, or maybe he was overmatched at times. There were just penalty issues for him. So if he cleans up the penalty issues and Pritchett is good enough and you feel good enough about him to go with him at left tackle, you're in a great spot at that position. So I think there's plenty of scenarios to consider to go along with Dalcourt, perhaps at guard. Ferguson is one of those guys, been around a while now. You've got some young players like Ola Salinen that we've seen working inside. Can be a tackle as well. So I think the interior, they're going to be just fine.
Roydell Williams back at practice. That was another note from Saturday. He began practice limited for injury reasons, but Nick Saban confirming that he has returned. He participated in the scrimmage. That running back spot, Travis, you got Jace McClellan coming back, Williams coming back, Justice Haynes, the freshman, coming in, highly touted freshman coming in, son of the former Georgia running back Veron Haynes, and don't forget Jam Miller. So interesting to see what that mix brings forth as well.
Yeah, and you heard Nick say it after the scrimmage on Friday. He feels good about those 4 guys. And you got another 4 5-star type coming in this summer to go with that group. So look, they feel good enough about that group right now that Emmanuel Henderson, who was a top 3 running back for the 2022 cycle, they've been able to put him out at wide receiver and pretty much leave him there. And I think they feel good about his future at wide receiver. But when you think about, the talk about becoming more of a physical presence, well, it makes sense because maybe your strongest area of the offense right now anyway is the running back position. So to feature those guys is sensible. It would be great to see some more of these wide receivers continue to come on. I know Nick was asked about Malik Benson. What I liked about his comment in relation to the junior college transfer was that he said Benson is a really good all-around player. So, this isn't the situation a year ago where you went to the portal once again with speed in mind and you kind of struck out there. This is a guy that can help you in all 3 levels of the passing game. It sounds like certainly speed, a big part of that with his ability to get deep. But yeah, if you can get that group to come along and kind of figure out the quarterback situation, the balance that we've heard Nick talk about, you should be able to achieve.
Yeah, no doubt. And if Benson's able to stretch the field vertically, that's going to be huge for Alabama. Like you said, if he's a good all-around football player and can break into that rotation, that's going to help Alabama regardless. But I felt like a lot of the deep completions that Alabama Young was able to connect with last year, not all of them certainly, but a lot of them were kind of broken plays, finding busted coverages, etc. Not necessarily what we saw maybe from Jameson Williams a year earlier, where he was just beating people by beating corners downfield by 2 steps, 3 steps or more, and getting it done that way. Alabama really didn't have that guy last year. If Malik Benson is able to be that guy and kind of bring that element of the passing game back, it's going to be big for Simpson, Milroe, whoever's at that quarterback spot.
Yeah, it felt like last year Alabama had a couple of solid number 2s, but didn't have that true number 1 type that they had over a stretch of really a decade or more. If you go back to Julio, starting in 2008, pretty much year in and year out. I guess 11 was a little bit of a break in that, but then 12, Amari comes in, then you go into Calvin Ridley, and then you're just rolling into that group. So no doubt, Malik Benson, similar to Justin Jefferson on the defensive side of the ball. You went junior college because you believe this guy could come in and really add something to that wide receiver position. I still think they've got some guys in the last couple classes that they feel like can still help them. Isaiah Bond being one of those guys. And I think Ja'Cory Brooks can still be a really, really good player. Same for Jermaine Burton. But if they get Benson to be that sort of play action deep threat, how many times have we heard Nick mention that too since the start of spring? Play action passing. Well, if you can run it, it should help some of these other guys get open too, that maybe need a little help because you have to really work and pay attention to the run game. But there's guys like Benson that you hope that even when you're not running it well, he's a guy that can get the job done.
The Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Moving on, going to thank a sponsor, Travis, Peterbrook Chocolatier. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, Peterbrook Chocolatier right there at 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa. Coming off another great stretch for Easter. I know the staff there at Peterbrook Chocolatier extremely thankful to you for your trust in them to make your holiday especially special. And you know what? You're going to have Mother's Day coming up right around the corner. So never too early to get ready for that. But in the meantime, treat yourself, right? Go by there. Check out that chocolate carousel, as I call it, right there in the middle of the store. When I walk in, that looks like one of those, one of those carousels to a 4 or 5 year old, with the horses on it and all that. But it's a chocolate carousel, and I can jump on it. I jump on that thing. I get the dark chocolate almonds. I get the dark chocolate malt balls. I got the dark chocolate espresso beans. I got milk chocolate raisins, all that great stuff right there in the carousel when you walk in to Peterbrook Chocolatier, 1530 McFarland Boulevard North. in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa. Caitlin and her great staff, they're going to take great care of you. Check them out today. Peterbrook Chocolatier, Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
There must be smoke coming off the cash register after Easter over there. It's got to be.
Yeah, it's like I've always told folks, it's not from Peter Cottontail if it's not from Peterbrook Chocolatier. So
there you go.
You put that little bit on them and it kind of pressures them maybe a little bit.
Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Moving on, Travis, we'll talk a little bit of Alabama basketball here before we close things out. Maybe touch on that Hugh Freeze idea about inter squad spring scrimmages. But first, basketball, Travis. The exodus has begun with this basketball roster. If Nate Oates, it's unbelievable how many guys have bolted at this point. If Nate Oates had a scrimmage right now, I think it'd be a one-on-one between Ryland Griffin and Nick Pringle.
3v3, the Gus Macker, that old tournament. Remember that?
So, but now, of course, a couple of these guys could be back, though, Travis. But this, as we said at the top of the show, it's been a couple of weeks since we podcasted last. At that time, Alabama's basketball roster hadn't quite fallen apart. Now it pretty much is completely fallen apart. And so to recap, Brandon Miller, Noah Clowney, of course, off to the NBA draft. We won't be seeing them coming back. Jaden Bradley has entered the transfer portal. Highly unlikely we see Jaden Bradley back. You've got Charles Bediako, Javon Quinterly, and Mark Sears all declaring NBA draft eligibility. Conceivably, all of them could be back at Alabama, Travis. I think Bediako I think Sears and Bediako probably will be back. That's my guess. Quinterly, I'm more questionable about whether we'll see him in a college uniform again. But just your thoughts on the way things have disintegrated on Nate Oates here in the last couple of weeks.
College basketball 2023, baby. It's kind of the way it works. And there's this quest now. Every team in college basketball wants to stay old, right? So it seems like we've transitioned from the one and dones coming out of high school to the transfer portal just ruling supreme. Everybody wants to stay old. Nobody wants to be, too heavy with first year players. And look, Nate, once again, has got a promising looking high school class coming in, but we've even seen some attrition from, that class already, some movement. So it's ever changing when it comes to roster management. I think you hit on it. I think for Mark Sears and Charles Bediako, where they're at in their college careers, why not test the waters, get the feedback, do it without representation. That way, if as expected, you need to go back to school, you can do that. Quinterly, as you said, is the wild card, especially with Jaden Bradley apparently moving on. So you got to have somebody play on the basketball as a legitimate point guard option. Now, Sears can do some of that, but that's not really who he is. And I think for Mark, it would seem likely that he would be back in the college game because, let's be honest, his second half of the season wasn't his best half. And for a guy at his size, he really needs to shoot the three on a more consistent clip, far more consistent clip than he did this season. So it makes some sense for at least a couple of those three guys that are in that process to come back. Obviously, Brandon Miller, Noah Clowney got first round, not only grades, but promises. And so you wish them well and off they go. But again, as much as anything, just Alabama working the portal right now. And not just working the portal, but now you got Antoine Petway completing the trifecta for assistant coaches to move on as head coaches. I mean, Nate's got a lot to sort through right now, and he's trying to work the portal. You're going to be getting into the recruiting stuff again soon. He's earning it right now, Chase.
Jaquan Walton, by the way, a quick note on an incoming guy from the transfer portal. He's headed to Alabama from Wichita State, a 6'7" forward. He was the leading scorer for the Shockers last year at 14 points a game, about 5.5 rebounds per game. Although the story in the Wichita Eagle, Travis, suggests that his immediate eligibility may be in question. He may have to graduate and be a grad transfer in order to be eligible right away. If he's not able to do that, then conceivably it could be, I guess, 24, 25 before he can help Nate Oates.
Yeah, he's already gone 4-2-4 once, right? He went Georgia, Shelton State, Wichita State.
Yeah.
Now Alabama, it appears. And I also understand Latrell Wrightsell Jr. is a guard from Cal State Fullerton that Alabama has interest in. We'll see how that continues to develop. BJ Mack, the forward from Wofford, has obviously been linked with Alabama. So, yeah, I mean, just to figure out who's coming back, how many spots exactly you have. It's a tightrope, man. College coaches have to walk more than ever with those precious spots.
Before we get out of here, Travis, really quickly, the Hugh Freeze scrimmage idea, back to football really quickly, the Auburn coach suggesting, I guess, at the beginning of last week, he thinks schools ought to play each other, in-state schools ought to play each other for charity and spring practice. He mentioned, I think certainly sensibly so, that it cuts injury risk in half because you only got 11 players on the field instead of 22. And of course, not surprisingly, the coaches at Troy and UAB, Trent Dilfer, were all for it. They were thumbs up on the idea. Nick Saban, his response when asked was a mix of it was a mix of an acknowledgement that he likes the idea, but a little non-committal, I guess, at the same time. It actually sounded like he was taken a little bit surprised by the question. I'm not even sure he may have not even really been briefed on exactly what Freeze had said. And while I do think it's a neat idea, it seems like an idea that would run into its share of hurdles too, because it would be a huge change. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, it's a conversation we seem to have almost yearly, and it's idealistically, it sounds great. To play someone else in the spring. And I think Hugh's idea about, maybe you charge a little bit and the take goes to folks or causes and need, that's all great. Look, end of the day, what I always default back to, though, is what does ESPN want to do? I think if ESPN and ESPN Plus wants you to play someone else, then that's probably what will happen at some point down the road. I would totally get UAB, Troy, South Alabama, those programs being all for playing the Alabamas and the Auburns and the SEC type programs. But are you going to really write them a check for like the 1.2 you would during the fall, Chase? I don't see that. I don't see that happening. So it as you said, there's more to it than just saying, yeah, just get them together, charge $5, give the money to charity. That's all great. But we both know logistically and a lot of different ways, including ESPN, you'd have to figure more than a thing or two out to make it happen.
I'll say this about your television point. If the way ESPN distributes spring games this way is any indication, you would think they'd be all for something like this, because they've gone from putting all kinds of spring games on regular TV or ESPN2 or ESPNU. Now they're streaming all that to Plus, which tells me that it's not the draw they want it to be, and so they might as well make what they can with a streaming service. So I don't know.
I think that's part of it. I think they also, like the SEC network, is committed to softball, baseball, spring sports too right now.
Right.
That's part of their deal, I think, with the Southeastern Conference, is that just because spring games start rolling around in football, you can't just start shoveling, content towards the streaming platforms that are in season, actually in season. But you know what you could do? You get Alabama and Southern Miss scrimmaging. You could sell more of those ESPN Plus subscriptions if you said, look, that's where you're going to find it.
Right.
Because I think that's part of what they're doing right now with all the spring games on Plus. Now, for Alabama, it's certainly different than, say, Vanderbilt from this past weekend, the demand. But I'm sure it doesn't hurt from that perspective either. The last year or two that Alabama and A-Day is on ESPN Plus, I'm sure they're selling a few subs, more than a few, to Alabama fans, begrudgingly, but selling them nonetheless.
Very, very begrudgingly.
They don't like that strain.
No. They're like, wait a minute. I can walk into the stadium for free, but I got to pay to watch it on day. That does not make sense, right? So, no doubt about it. And they've totally flipped it around. I mean, there was a time when you could catch all kinds of SEC spring games on your regular cable feed through some ESPN network or another. It's almost all streaming now. Yeah. If I'm not
last
mistaken,
couple of years, it's pretty much shifted to the Plus.
I think if I'm not mistaken, the Georgia spring game has been the only one in the SEC that was available on regular TV last year
Georgia
and this
Colorado this year. That's it.
Colorado, yeah,
because of Prime.
Yeah, yes. So,
and I think maybe they're on the Deuce or the other way around. But yeah, that's about it.
Get Prime to bring Colorado to Bryant-Denny for a spring game. Now you wouldn't have to put that on premium.
You could get Aflac to sponsor it. I mean, you'd have Prime and Nick in the commercials every break.
Prime would be down. He'd love it.
Oh, Prime would love it. All these. Well, I mean, Colorado is obviously a P5, or at least while the Pac-12 still is a P5.
Right.
But what about these coaches that are already on the hot seat? And let's say you're at an SEC program and you scrimmage Louisiana Lafayette or something, and you lose the scrimmage.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, we firing coaches in April now?
Right. Yeah.
And that admission they might charge, it might go to buyouts instead of charitable causes.
Love it. Love it. All right. That is going to do it for this edition of the Talkin Tide podcast. I'm glad to be on a new network here with Belly Up. Be sure to give us a like on Facebook, a subscription on YouTube, and a follow on Twitter. For Travis Reier of BamaOnline.com, I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News, co-host of Crimson Cover Television on WVUA 23, and we will talk to you next time right here on Talkin Tide.